All right, today we are going to be speaking with senior advisor for the Joe Biden for President campaign, Cristobal Alex, who has worked on. You've been working on campaigns for a long time. I mean, you're not new to this.
That's right. I'm a bit of an old timer. You can tell from my grays. I've had a couple of these campaigns behind me. I'm a viejito, they call me in the campaign.
So I want to talk. Let's start maybe by talking about the Latino vote. I've been speaking on my show, but also with my audience over on my Spanish language show on the Estrella Network about the Latino vote and the growing importance demographically of the Latino vote in the United States. I was slightly disappointed, but not altogether surprised that a higher share of the Latino vote did not go to Joe Biden. Now, I know that there's a number of ways that we could spin this. We could look at specific states. We could look at sort of the range of the vote of the Latino vote that typically goes to the Republican candidate. And certainly what Donald Trump got is within that range. But is there any disappointment on your side that it was not an even more overwhelming victory for Joe Biden among that group?
I'll say that we're very proud of the work of the campaign and all of the work that preceded the campaign in critical battleground states around the country, decades of organizing work from young people, from immigration rights organizations to Puerto Rican organizations to others that have led to this election, which I think is an important moment. If you look at the trajectory of building Latino political power, I think we're approaching a high watermark. And yes, the Latino community, as you know better than anybody, is not a monolith. And so we do want to look more specifically at data from states or even within states. And, when we set out in the general election with our Latino program, we set a goal to match the high watermark of the 2012 Obama-Biden re-election campaign that hit 71% of the Latino vote. We are just about there as the numbers are calculated and tabulated. We're at about 71% range right now. In some of the more crucial battleground states, that's nationally. If you look at if you drill down a little bit, you look at a place like Wisconsin, for example, where we had a 100,000 plus Latino vote turnout. In those places, Latinos really exceeded that, hitting almost 80%. If you look at Maricopa County, when we flipped Arizona, or in Pima County, you're looking at over 80%, some places 85% of the vote. It's also the reason why we flipped Arizona. It's why we kept Nevada. It's why we elected a United States senator, a Latino United States senator in New Mexico. And if you look at Pennsylvania, a huge surge of Latino voters, a lot of Boricua, a lot of Puerto Ricans there. And again, because of the hard work that preceded the campaign, and proudly, I will say, because of the campaign's significant investments, over $100 million to reach Latino voters, we exceeded almost that 80% mark in Pennsylvania, again, proving to be the margin of difference. We're very excited about that.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So those are some good examples. I mean, let's now talk about one that's an area of concern to me. We've known for a long time that while the American Latino voter community is not a monolith, it is a very left community in total, with the notable exception of Cuban Americans. And we know about this sort of anti-Castro reflexive thing and fears of so-called socialism, which will often influence particularly Florida Cuban Americans to vote at higher levels for Republicans than we see in other states. It would be huge, would it not, to be able to bring over more of that Cuban American community in Florida, because without Florida, the map for Republicans nationally gets systemically very, very difficult. And I'm wondering what you think it will take to bring over more Cuban American voters.
That's a great question. I'll start by saying, Miami-Dade and South Florida, a true battleground, and we fought very hard and competed for every single voter there, and we did win by a good margin the Latino vote in Florida. We've got some work to do with Cubans and also Venezuelans and others. And if you look a little deeper, I think President-elect did very well with younger voters, young Latino voters, especially. Those were a very high vote share for us. But we've got some work to do with some of the older voters, especially the Cuban voters. And, I'll say it's hard to compare this election to 2016 when Secretary Clinton got a lot of support from the Cuban community. Part of the reason for that was, if you remember the presidential primary in 2016 on the Republican side, Donald Trump spent a lot of time attacking Marco Rubio, for example, among other things that brought down his percentage among Cuban voters. But as you pointed out, that usually a higher percent goes Republican there. So we are going to do some work there. And I think part of it we'll see trending in our direction very soon is, once President-elect Joe Biden and takes office, along with his Vice President Kamala Harris, we're going to do a lot of work to make sure that we can expand democracy in Cuba, that we strengthen relationships throughout Latin and Central America, and make sure that we're doing the things that we need to do that will eventually, again, this is going to be good policy, but eventually will yield better percentages in some of these communities when we look at the politics of it.
Yeah, you mentioned that this year Donald Trump was not attacking Marco Rubio in the way that he was in 2016. One of the other differences I noticed, and I wonder if you think this is relevant electorally, is that merely by chance, not because Donald Trump's views have become more enlightened, but merely by chance, there was much less discussion about Mexican rapists and criminals in the last 6 months. There was much less discussion about the wall, although at rallies Trump would say the wall is being built and Mexico is paying for it. Obviously, both lies. By sheer distraction, it seems, from what's been going on, Trump did less of that. And I'm wondering if that also ended up helping him a little bit in the end.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've wondered that myself. And, I did expect a lot more of the typical vitriol, demagoguing Latino communities, especially immigrants. And it was there, no doubt, just not on the front page or the first thing out of his mouth that we would see in 2018 or in 2016.
Right.
Part of the reason for that is undoubtedly the fact that our country is facing a pandemic, and the economy is in bad shape, again, because of Donald Trump's failed leadership. And that was top of mind for voters. And he tried very hard, no doubt, to try and make the election anything about himself or his failed leadership. But at the end, it becomes a referendum on his handling of COVID, his complete and utter failure there. And so it was hard for him to turn that script. Now, I will say, even though he spoke perhaps less about immigrants and didn't attack Latinos and immigrants as much as he did previously, his administration wasted no time in trying to do harm to the communities. And one of the first things that you will see President-elect, when he becomes president, Joe Biden do is undo much of the harm that Donald Trump and his administration has done.
Yeah, so I want to talk about that next. So let's get into that. We've started to see this list of possible day one executive orders. We've heard about getting back in the WHO, Paris climate, trans-military ban. Maybe something can be done in terms of the trade relationship with China via executive order. And there's this question mark around DACA and Dreamers. What is the day one plan? What can be done via executive order with that program?
Quite a bit, actually. And our new chief of staff, White House chief of staff, Ron Klain, last week talked about some of those day one priorities. And one of those, and it's very important to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, is protecting Dreamers. So there will be executive action on day one. And there will also be an immigration bill that includes, obviously, Dreamers and their families, and a pathway to citizenship, a roadmap to citizenship for the 11 million undocumented in this country. That's going to happen right away. Now, of course, we're going to have to do a lot of work to get the immigration bill passed, but through executive action, there's going to be a very swift undertaking to protect Dreamers.
Yeah, I think that if Democrats don't take the Senate, tax reform and the healthcare expansion that Joe Biden wants to do, I think they don't happen. I do think that because some of these immigration issues are actually relevant to some Republican senators. I think that the chance of doing something on immigration is slightly higher if even without having the Senate. But a lot is riding on those races in Georgia, isn't it?
A lot's riding on those races. And what I will say is we're hopeful. And again, you saw Georgia turning blue. You're seeing a record enthusiasm, a record vote there, a very diverse electorate. All of those things bode well. But I think it's important to remember Joe Biden has a very distinguished public service career in the Senate. He knows how to work across the aisle to get big things done for America, whether that was beating the NRA not once but twice, pushing for the very first climate change legislation when he was in the Senate, whether that was advocating and getting passed the Violence Against Women's Act. I mean, the list goes on and on. He does very well in these situations. I mean, healthcare, again, the ACA, another prime example of him working hard and being able to get things done with Democrats and with Republicans. And so you can expect for major pieces of legislation like that for Joe Biden to do what he does best, which is to work with others to unify not just our country, but to unify our government to tackle these major challenges.
Yeah, I don't doubt for a second Joe Biden's ability, willingness, and interest to do that. I just think it's naive to think these Republicans are going to participate in anything that doesn't obviously and completely benefit what they've laid out as their priorities. I think the Republican Party has changed dramatically, but I remain cautiously optimistic. I think the concern among some in the progressive left is what would Joe Biden have to compromise in order to get some of these Republicans on board?
Here's the thing. As a progressive myself, I think what we need to remember here is the country is on this precipice right now.
Mm-hmm.
And as Joe Biden talked about this during the campaign, in our darkest times, our nation has been able to come together and achieve the greatest good. If you look at some of the moments in history, whether it's coming out of the Great Depression, whether it's coming out of World War II, we're able to come together and do amazing things. And I know it sounds naive, but I am optimistic that we are at one of these moments now where we're going to have to number one, get this pandemic, the virus under control, but then there's an opportunity, and partly because we have to rebuild this economy. And there are a lot of major components that will go into that, including major investments. Again, we're going to work with Republicans and conservatives and progressives and independents and all Americans to get this done. But we need to be able to rebuild the economy. We need to make sure that we get climate change under control. And there's ways where we can build millions of jobs in this country that are green jobs. And so that's part of it. And that's one of the things we need to do. And the other is, with all of the racial justice issues that are now getting a lot of the attention that they deserve, there's going to be a way to address some of these systemic racial issues in our country. Again, even though we're dealing with this pandemic and having to rebuild this economy, there are opportunities within that to address some of these things. And we're going to do it.
No disagreement from me in terms of the stakes or the priorities. Significant skepticism about the current Republican Party as a participant in that. But we will very soon start to see how it plays out. We've been speaking with Cristobal Alex, who is a senior advisor for the Joe Biden for President campaign. I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, it was an honor. Thanks for having me.